Good morning or good evening, depending where you are. I think it's evening for my friends over in the UK. And welcome to today's Cichlids and Coffee. And wherever you are, I hope you're drinking out of one of these. Now I'm thinking for my friends in the UK, and I notice some of them are on here already, like Darren. And I'm thinking of coming up with a channel beer mug. Let me know what you think about that. And would you use it during the live stream? That's the important thing. Would you use it during the live stream? So, all right. So I want to thank those of you who hung in there with me last week when I was going through the focus issues. I think I've figured it out. And certainly give me some feedback as we go along as to both the sound and the picture quality. Let me know if there is some jumping around, some focus issues. I think I have them resolved. I've watched probably 100 hours of tutorials on the on the Sony a6400. I think I'm starting to get my wits around it. It's a pretty feature-rich camera, maybe a little bit too much. JC Morales, buenos días, amigo. ¿Cómo estás? ¿Cómo te encuentras? ¿En buen salud? Qué bueno. All right. So we have a lot to talk about today. Let me go ahead and do the first round here of business. And today's topic, of course, is going to be the GHPHKH. And do I look a little confused in this picture? Of course, the whole intention of that thumbnail was to impart confusion, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm a chemist or an absolute expert in this area, but I am going to share with you an understanding that I have of it, and that will be, I feel, sufficient to get your wits around the tank and be able to control what's going on, and. So let's go ahead and get into the subject after our usual welcome logo here, welcome icon. Now remember, if you're new, if this is your first time to a live stream, or if you're watching this on the replay, be sure to hit that sub and bell. If you're someone who likes to always be getting new ideas and information, hit the sub and hit the bell. That way you'll always get informed when I upload new content and also when I'm going to go live. So with that plug out of the way, I need to do a couple shout outs, and the shout outs are to, of course, my wonderful moderators who, they have their own schedule conflicts and things, so sometimes they're here, sometimes they're not, but they still deserve a shout out. And of course that is, Kevin Green and Danny Riddell. Danny, by the way, is in the middle of moving and, moving tanks and doing things like that in Chicago. So he if he's here, it'll be a miracle. I don't see him. But also, of course, GP, who's been very steady recently and very helpful, and of course the amazing Candy, who helps me out quite a bit and seems is an amazing multitasker. So thank you very much to the best moderators on YouTube, and of course the purpose of a moderator is to make sure that everybody kind of keeps it decent and respectful, and also they're sort of on troll patrol. Some folks. Someone called them Cheeto fingers. They just sit at home in their underwear and eat Cheetos, and their fingers become eventually permanently yellow. These are trolls, and they like to jump onto sites and make noise. And the moderators are the ones who crack down on Cheeto fingers. So also a big shout out to last week's super chats, and we had GP came in, and Remco, Marty Borst twice, and Michael Ferguson twice. So thank you so much, folks, for that support of the channel. It's very, very appreciated. And super chats, for those of you who don't know, is when you throw a little dough at the channel, and it helps the channel with it helps with things like lighting and fish and equipment and computers and all that kind of stuff. And if I told you what I've invested in just being able to do this live stream, you would say I was absolutely crazy. So, and a very, very, very special shout out to Matthew Carmoshe. I hope I'm pronouncing your name, Matt, correctly. Matthew did something completely unexpected, contacted me privately, and helped the channel out, and very, very appreciated. Matt, if you're on the stream, thank you so much. You are truly a friend of the channel. So let's talk a little bit about what's been going on. And I released 3 videos, and the Father's Day gift video was kind of cool. It was the timing of it was good because I was able to tie it into that Amazon affiliate program that like I mentioned before, after 9 years I've finally become a member of. And so I was able to list some things that I really like that help me out in fish keeping, and then tie them into the affiliate program. So that was kind of good. It got a decent response. I don't know, I think it's under 2,000 views, but anyway, it was fun. It was a fun thing to just throw out there. And when you throw a video out that is tied to a certain event or date, it kind of sticks it in that time period, so it doesn't really get a lot of traction after. Maybe it'll get traction next Father's Day, but at any rate, I didn't expect it to do a tremendous amount because it came out at the last minute, and I think the Sunday, or no, the afternoon before Father's Day. So anyway, maybe I'll do another one for other events that are coming up. I had a very good response on the canister. The canister video where I talked about how to make that canister leak proof. And interestingly enough, though, the silicone, the food grade silicone that I use to lubricate O-rings, I couldn't find it on Amazon. It's not available. I couldn't find it anywhere. It's made by Husky, and for some reason, all Amazon says is no longer available, and not sure when they're going to offer it again. But a couple of folks got onto the comments under that video and made suggestions of other silicone, other food grade silicone lubricants that you can use on your O-rings. They're totally safe for your fish, and will keep those O-rings nice and supple and doing what they're supposed to do, sealing the canister. And of course, the idea of putting a plastic piece of Tupperware under it, like a Rubbermaid. I, of course, stole that from one of you. I forget who suggested it. If you're on the chat, go ahead and take credit. I stole that idea from one of you. And for those of you who have, back issues, or don't feel comfortable lifting a very large canister like a Fluval FX6 or maybe a Sun 3000, you can buy those with wheels on them, and then so you can wheel them out, and it just makes life a little bit easier. Also, I talked about water sensors. You can put sensors that will give you an alarm. Some of them will even send you a text that there's some moisture, there's some humidity, and there's also things you can plug your canister into, and when water levels increase a little bit or hit the sensor, it cuts off the power. So at any rate, so there's lots of little things that you can do that can make you completely worry-free when it comes to running canisters, because you have a unit under the tank, and that could potentially siphon from an intake that is low in the tank. You could considerably get a lot of water onto your floor. So anything that you can do to help offset that could make a big difference. And the other one was, of course, a discussion on that large trout, the Malawi trout, which completely calmed down, And I was asking you folks for ideas on what you thought was going on. Was it the change in the moon? Was it the atmospheric pressure, the time of year? It turned on. He turned bright blue and was a tear, and then it like the switch flipped and it stopped. And now things are more, they're more peaceful in the tank. And the Fusco is still acting very, very guarded, very shy, still recovering a bit from his wounds. And I may even have to pull the Fusco out and put him in a different tank so he can really heal up, get his strength back, because the trout really asserted himself. And it's a little bit of a karma. I mean, these fish go after the fish when they're smaller. Then when the fish puts on size and weight, the table gets turned. And it's like that bully in middle school, and then the people that who stopped growing in middle school, and the people that he or she used to bully all of a sudden have put on 50 pounds and 5 or 6 inches in height, and kind of turns the table a little bit. So anyway, we see it in the fish world as well. So tomorrow there's going to be a video on stocking your tank. I'm going to discuss the pros and cons of a light stocking versus a heavy stocking, and the tanks that will be featured in that video are going to be the 100-gallon behind me, which is most certainly what you would call a heavily stocked tank, and the 60-gallon, which is directly across from me here, and that you would call a very lightly stocked tank. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons, what I love about being heavily stocked, what I hate about it, what I love about a lightly stocked tank, and what I hate about it. And you folks, of course, can watch and chime in and let me know what your thoughts are on the stocking of tanks, what your preference is, and most importantly, why that's your preference. On the thumbnail, of course, I have the Photoshop my red cap, Lethrinops red cap, perhaps one of my favorite all-time fish. So let's talk a little bit about GH and pH and KH. And before we do that, let me do a quick little check here on how you folks are doing. And look at the chat here. Hey, David, Elflower 1, stars, hello. And Candy's here. Hello, Candy. Ray, very, very good. I see a lot of you are on. And I will get into the Q&A with you as we get towards the end. And as we move along, very often I don't see the chat because it can be very distracting. So if you ask a question, I don't jump on it right away. Don't be upset at me. It just means that I'm trying to stay on topic. And but I see we have a turnout of about 76 currently is what I show. Very, very good. I see Candy is busy sharing links. Thank you, Candy. And I will get to your questions in a little bit here. So let's get into the topic and of GH and pH and KH. And I borrowed a lot of it from an article that I've referenced before. And this is an article that is over at the Cichlid forum. And it's I have actually a copy of it here, and I want to go over it with you and just discuss some of the points on it, because I think it's important. And it starts off with a comment that about how pH is probably the single most important property to understand and monitor. And I did a test of pH on the tank behind me before I started today's live stream, and it came out just about at 8. Now, what that means is that it's it has very little acid in the water. It's not acidic. And as your pH numbers go down, your your acid levels, your acidity goes up. So neutral's about 7, I believe here. It says here 7 being neutral, less than 7 is acidic, greater than 7 is alkaline. And it has an interesting little graph here, and I'm going to put a link to this article underneath this video when I finally post it, and I add the date stamps, or not the date stamps rather, but the time stamps. It says Lake Malawi species like a 7.4 to 8.6. So this must be based on a survey of the lake. You know, you get these varieties, 7.4 to 8.6. So if you're sitting in the mid 7s or so, or even maybe maybe close to 7.4, don't worry too much. I get people, Ben, I'm at 7.5. What can I do to raise my pH? According to this article, do nothing. Don't worry about it. And it says you're your Tanganicans, right? Your Lake Tanganyika species, 7, 8 to 9. So that's that much less acidic, much more basic, and your Lake Victorias are 7.2 to 8.6. 7.2 to 8.6 are the recommended. It says here, fish are extremely sensitive to changes in pH, and it is important to maintain a stable level in your aquarium. When adjustment is necessary, avoid changes greater than 0.3 units per day. So this, you get into questions like, if I notice that my pH is, let's say it's 7.3, should I start adding additives? Should I put in chemical? Should I use chemical means to raise that pH up? And if so, what? And you have a balance here between good pH, like the pH where it should be, and the impact of moving it too quickly. A pH shift too quickly on the fish can be very, very shocking. And so it's been my philosophy, my way of operating. And granted, I have a situation that is a bit ideal in that I'm getting a high pH out of the tap. I'm getting water out of the tap with a lot of minerals, already hard water, and but it's been my philosophy that you're better off to go very, very slowly and allow fish to acclimate very gradually, as opposed to doing things that could make a shift that is faster than the fish can tolerate. I came out with a video, I don't know, maybe a year, 2 years ago, Stop Chasing pH. Stop chasing pH. Because you start putting additives, and then you do a water change, and then you've got, well, how much additive do I need to add for the amount of water that I replaced? And it can get into a kind of a wild scene unless you're measuring things with with laboratory precision. So it's been my philosophy to just kind of go, let fish acclimate, don't mess with pH in a way that could shift it more than a fish can tolerate. They also claim here that a higher pH with Malawi, with African cichlids, is going to help bring out more color. And sometimes people are asking me like, hey, what's the secret? What's the what are you feeding them? What kind of lights are you using? Where do you get your fish from? All of that does have something to do with it, but probably all of it is of less importance than the fact that I have them in a high pH type of situation, which really makes them very brilliant. And all those other factors they're important too, but it says that they will actually demonstrate the greatest amount of color in the proper pH. And so let's shift a little bit, and then we'll get back to pH. But let's shift to GH, and that's general hardness. And it says your general hardness or total hardness is a measure of the magnesium and calcium. So when you see GH, all we're talking about are those two key minerals, magnesium and calcium. How much magnesium and calcium do you have in your water? And it talks about here how also, again, the vibrant and colorfulness of the aquariums it has a lot to do with having the GH in the right range, and the right range being 160 to 320. The GH general hardness, the calcium magnesium levels in the tank behind me are at 300. They're right around 300. So again, this is contributing 300 parts per million. This is contributing to the vibrancy, the color of the fish at 300. So I see Candy found Stop Chasing pH. That was good, Candy. That's a video from way back. You brought your A game like you usually do. But yeah, check that video out, Stop Chasing pH. This is an interesting comment in the article. It should be noted that GH levels naturally drop over time because minerals do not stay suspended in water very long. This is one of many good reasons for regular partial water changes. I've talked about this before. This calcium and magnesium that's suspended in your aquarium is, over time, these particles are starting to go down, and eventually they're not going to be there. So what impact is that going to have? Those things are actually, they're referred to in this article as sponges for acid. They work as sort of acid sponges, and they buffer acids. So what will happen is that if you go a very long time without replacing any water and without having suspended calcium and magnesium in your aquarium, what's going to happen is that those sponges are going to disappear. They're going to settle down. And what that will result in is a jump in acid, right? Nitrates are nitric acid. The end of, right, you go from your ammonia, your nitrite, nitric acid. That acid is being kept in check by calcium and magnesium. It's not allowed to go crazy because you have calcium and magnesium. I suspect in Lake Malawi, the rock formations, the sand, everything else around it are very, very calcium magnesium rich, and releasing that calcium and magnesium constantly into the lake. And what that's doing is it's sponging up acid, because you know there's a lot of ammonia being created in there, right? So that acid is being sponged up and contained by the calcium magnesium. So this is something that a person says, well, I haven't changed my water I haven't done a water change in 6 months. I kind of hold my breath a little bit. Now, sometimes they'll have fish who like a low pH, a 6, something like that. And okay, well, that's probably going to be okay. Now, there are other ways that you can add calcium and magnesium to the tank water. Again, taking the approach of being gradual. You can use limestone as a decoration, and limestone will gradually leach. It'll leach out. It'll release calcium and magnesium into the water. You can also use aragonite or crushed coral as a substrate, and these will release calcium and magnesium into the water. And so it gives you sort of a second safeguard against the suspended particles, dropping because you missed a few water changes for whatever reason. You were sick or out of town or whatever. Usually I use aragonite. The tank behind me here, this is not aragonite. This is just sand. It's just plain old sand that I picked up from a company called Imaginarium. So I don't have that aragonite or crushed coral backup that I have in the other aquariums. And so what I did is I put crushed coral in a large mesh bag, and I shoved it into the FX6. And it has a lot of grooves and stuff, so beneficial bacteria can also grow on it. But it's an old fish keeper's trick. So when the water circulates over that crushed coral, it's picking up calcium and magnesium, perhaps even more so than if it were just laying in the bottom of the tank, because it's actually being, it's being worked over with moving water, with very rapidly moving water. So using that, I see GP uses crushed coral in his sump. And again, you have water passing over that crushed coral. It's helping it to release calcium, magnesium, and introducing it into the tank. Ideally, and most worry-free for me, is to use a crushed coral or a aragonite substrate. And that's probably what I'm going to be doing. Now, just as a bonus tip, when you use a very fine sand, like I have in this tank, you don't want that sand being picked up and spit into the intake of your the canister of your filters, whether it's a canister or any kind of an intake. And so I suggest, if you use sand, buy some black rocks. If you have black substrate, buy some black river rock, smooth river rock, and put it underneath where the intake is. Put several river rocks there, and that way, at least the likelihood, it still could happen, because these fish will carry sand for a ways and then spit it out. But at least in the perimeter of the intake, there isn't going to be a lot of sand being scooped up into the intake, which can foul up the impeller and motor and pump. And also in the case of a fluval FX6, like I have in this tank here, I believe that it worked as an abrasive and ended up creating a situation with the purge valve at the bottom of the FX6, and it started leaking, and I had to replace it. FX6 parts, for those of you who have the FX6 canisters, are very expensive. And so, a little purge valve about this big was $26 plus shipping. So, a bonus tip for those of you who are watching. And Jonathan Amon, hello Jonathan, how are you? Hello Ben, I use borehole water, which is harder than the normal tap water in Cape Town. I use sea sand with fine crushed coral, which increases the pH. Yeah, you have a perfect cichlid situation there. If I was an African cichlid, I'd want to go live at Jonathan's house. So let's talk a little bit about a KH. What the heck is KH? Now we're getting into what is called carbonate hardness. And it's also known as buffering capacity or total alkalinity. It's a measurement of carbonates and bicarbonates in the water, best described as water's ability to keep pH stable as acids or bases are added. So again, how can we prevent a tank crash? My KH in the tank behind me is sitting at around 180. Recommended is 180 to 240. So I'm at the low end of that, but still within an acceptable range, and not something that I'm going to go and mess with. And if it was low, if it was sitting around 120 or something, I might use the recipe that they talk about here, but I'll get to that in a second. It says, again, these things act as a sponge for those, and so that things don't affect or impact the pH. Without adequate buffering, the pH in your aquarium will eventually drop, because end result of the nitrogen cycle is nitric acid, which slowly builds up between water changes. With sufficient buffering, the pH remains stable. And again, for Riff Lake aquariums, KH ideally should be in the range of 180 to 240 parts per million. So I'm at the bottom end of that at about 180. The recommendation in this article, the first thing that they recommend is that you go and test your tap water. Test your tap for these characteristics, even if it's something as simple as a strip test, these little strips. Just get get a starting point, get a benchmark. And they say that should be the first thing that you do. Just see what your tap is like. And under the heading, do I really want to tamper with these properties? And it says the first thing, go ahead and check your tap and see what you've got. And then if you absolutely have to, you can make some changes. To raise the KH and the pH, the KH and the pH seem to have a more intimate relationship here than the GH. It says here you can add baking soda, just plain old sodium bicarbonate baking soda. And it recommends a baseline recommendation of 1 teaspoon for 5 gallons of water. For an established aquarium, remember to take this slowly, as fish are highly sensitive to pH changes, and there are some off-the-shelf products that you can use. Now, again, if you start doing this, once you get onto that road, you're going to have to stay on that road. So if you do a 75% water change or a 20% water change, you're going to have to do some figuring and some testing so that you can then add the right amount of bicarbonate and really measure it out correctly so that you don't create a situation that's going to shock the fish. And again, the tip that's given in this article is the same way that I tend to think. Instead of relying solely on additives for buffering, you can use crushed coral, crushed oyster shell, crushed limestone, aragonite, or dolomite as a substrate. Seashells, limestone rock, or Texas holy rock, which is also a type of limestone, will help to provide continuous buffering as they leach carbonates into the water. So again, this is the way to, just an easier way to do it. If you want a lower pH, let's say that you have fish that like a more neutral water, and you're getting a high pH out of your tap, you can use things like driftwood. Driftwood will actually lower the pH. You can also get a little bit of discoloring with tannins, but that's something that will clear up eventually, and you can use things like activated charcoal might help clear that up, maybe even Purigen, something like that. To raise the GH, right, the general hardness, the calcium magnesium, it's recommended that you add Epsom salt, just plain old off the counter, off the shelf Epsom salt, magnesium sulfate. A baseline recommendation is 1 tablespoon for 5 gallons of water, and this is important. Dissolve in a cup of aquarium water if adding directly to the tank before adding it, right? While adjusting the total hardness is not as potentially dangerous to your fish as adjusting the pH, dramatic changes of any sort can be stressful. Flashing, rubbing on the gravel or rocks is often attributed to changes in hardness. Personally, I would make any substantial GH adjustment over a period of 2 or 3 days if my aquarium were already stocked with fish. Rockwork in your aquarium helps with hardness too, while the effects are negligible, except with limestone, which is mostly calcium carbonate and therefore works on GH and KH. So if you can get your hands on some limestone, you don't mind the way it looks, it's good for cichlid tanks. Gets into also limestone, Texas holy rock, limestone, pagoda, I guess that's a type of rock, tufa, lace rock, petrified wood, quartz, slate, marble, even common river rock can all be used in your aquarium safely. Be sure to thoroughly clean and sterilize or boil anything suspect before putting it in your tank. Some people will dilute their tank with water that has been softened. In other words, if they want to lower the pH, they'll do a water change and then add water that is, that's actually a softened water. like a distilled water. You'll pick up some distilled water and add it to the tank. That will lower the pH. And again, you just have to watch out. Now, this was a very interesting point that was made in the article. And I found this kind of interesting. It says here, to test your tap water for pH, dechlorinate a sample and then circulate or aerate it for at least 60 minutes before testing. Overnight would be even better. This will allow any gases to escape that could temporarily lower pH and skew your test results. So this is interesting. So the claim here is that the chlorine that is being used, and I imagine, I'm not sure if chloramine would also do the same thing, could be actually impacting the results that we're seeing. So I'd never seen that, or if I saw it before, I didn't pay any attention to it. And if some of you do that, if some of you take your tap water and let it sit overnight before you test it for pH, I'd be very curious if you notice a big difference from testing it right from the tap versus letting, stirring it around, letting it sit 24 hours, letting some of the chlorine gas off, and then test it and see what difference you get in your pH reading. That could be very interesting. Because of course, when you add apart from the water conditioners that you're adding, there is going to be some gassing off in your tank as well, and so that could be impacting pH. So at any rate, I highly recommend that you look at this article. As you can see, it has a tremendous amount of information. I'm scratching the surface here. I hope this helps you a little bit to understand what's going on here. And there are some folks, I was going to mention this, James Green, I see you're saying the word explosions here. There are some rocks that if you boil them, you're going to have a real big problem. And so keep that in mind. But some of the rocks that were mentioned, I don't think that any of those would be a problem if you boil them. Jack Adair, my tap water definitely changes pH over time, goes from 7.3 to 7.8 overnight. That's huge. That's huge because one little jump in pH. I think it says that one jump is like 100 times. It's like a earthquake scale. Like 8 is 100 times more than 7 on the Richter scale. pH is like that as well. You're getting so that's a huge difference. So I'll put a link when I post this to YouTube. I'll go ahead and put a link when I add the timestamps to the video, and you folks can do your own little research. There also are other links in that article to other articles that you can refer to. And let me take a look at some of your comments here and see what's going on. I'm going to go back a little bit. Elflower 1 star. So what have you decided? Taking fish to your move or giving them a new home? Elflower, I'm still on the fence. There are some fish that are going to be very difficult for me to separate from. At the same time, I think a 1,000-mile journey might be very stressful unless I can get them shipped. But that means that if I get them shipped, I have an aquarium that's ready to go, that they can be put in safely. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things to consider. So I haven't decided yet. So I'm still on the fence. In 2 weeks, there probably isn't going to be a live stream. I'm going to be in Nashville looking at places, and we'll see. We'll see. And if you're in Southern California and you're looking at having an instant cichlid collection, make me an offer. Let's see here. Leah Jet. Leah Jet says that Cheetos actually burn forever. You know, we're always learning on this channel, and now we know that Cheetos are a good source for fire. So. Oh my God. All right. No, don't keep your fish Cheetos, please. What's the largest fish you kept? Candy. Someone's asking Candy a question. And Nikki Guzman, you know, I was thinking about that idea of making a hole in the because you can break the siphon and get air into the hoses, and of course that's going to stop a leaking canister. If you can, it's probably also going to burn out your motor, but I think better a burned out motor on a $75 to $100 Sun or even a $300 FX6. I'd rather have a burned out motor than, you know, $5,000 in hardwood floor damage. So I was just trying to think through whether a canister in a vacuum system. I know that with a sump, if you put a hole in the output right below the water line, and that water line starts to go down, it's going to break the siphon. So you're not going to have a back siphon. So you can also put one-way valves so that water isn't going to travel back, right? You can splice a one-way flow valve into a hose so that water is not going to come back down the hose, or it could travel one way. That'd be okay for the output. So I'm just trying to figure out the engineering on it. If a hole below the water line with a canister would work to help avoid a flood, and also how much would it reduce the ability of the canister to take in water from where it's supposed to take in the water? Would that be compromised a lot? And so anyway, it's something I was about to include it in the video, but I started to think that, well, maybe a vacuum system like a canister is going to operate differently from, let's say, a straight sump pump, and so breaking siphons, and if the leak is at one of the hose, where the hoses attach, or so. Anyway, I'm just getting my wits around it, and but that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. And GP has a 12-inch frontosa. My God, there's probably no fish that frontosa couldn't get in his mouth. When you see a frontosa yawn, it's like a hippopotamus, you know. Let's see. So we got some great conversations here going on between you. It looks like we're at 100 now. Thank you very much for all of you who are on the live stream. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in now. I'm going to go ahead and move into the Q&A section of our live stream. Darren, that's a very good point. I talk about that in several videos. Most of our fish are tank bred, 20, 30 generations down the line. So do we really need to replicate, to have exact, lake or river of origin characteristics in the tank? Or are these fish, they're just, 20 generations into being tank bred? Now, I have heard that, I have heard with the clown loaches, someone told me one time when I told them that the clowns that I happen to keep in this tank behind me really prefer a lower pH, but yet they've been in there for 5 years, thriving, never get sick, doing well. And the person said that clown loaches usually are taken from from Indonesia, wherever their place of origin, and so they're not really a tank bred species per se. So I'm not sure about that, but at any rate, let's see here. Elflower wants you folks to let her know. Elflower wants to know, what's your substrate of choice, sand, gravel, or dirt? Taking a survey. Well, you must be getting into a planted tank if you even bring up dirt in that conversation. And Sean Declerc, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Excuse me, I use aragonite in my Malawi and Tanganyika tanks, sand or bare bottom in everything else. Sounds good. Sounds like a plan. Any other questions, go ahead and put them in the comments. I am scrolling them as we speak. Darren, that's genius. Absolute genius. Darren says if you like to if you want to save money, take these strips and cut them right down the middle, and you'll get two strips for the price of one. That's some genius stuff going on. That's true. Shouldn't affect the color, right? Be sure your scissor doesn't have any humidity or liquid on it. And that's interesting, Darren. I would have never thought of that. That's kind of cool, actually. I might do that. I might just do it just for the heck of it. All of a sudden, you're getting two strips for the price of one. API is going to hate you. But who cares, right? Cat Sailor, Ben, I use gravel in my tank only, let me see, I use gravel only as I'm fearful of having issues pop up with my FX6 when you least expect it. Your thoughts on that? If it's I'm not really sure if I really understand the question, Cat Sailor. Are you saying you use gravel so that it doesn't get sucked into the FX and foul up the pump? Is that what you're worried about? I'm not really sure what it is that's causing the worry. I use of course, a sponge over my intake, and that catches very often when I clean it out. I see sand, come out of it when I rinse it out in tank water. So it is helping to stop things from getting into the actual unit itself and possibly fouling up the motor, the pump. So if you're concerned, contact Corey. Corey has over at the Aquarium Co-op, he has a large sponge, and I took the end piece off of the intake, the grill. I took that off. I drilled some holes in that tube, and then I put the sponge on it, and that Corey sells, the extra large sponge, and it seems to be doing a good job at helping to keep sand. Some sand might still get in there. This is why I suggest put some bigger rocks around the bottom of the intake. At the same time, I like those intakes to be low, as I've mentioned in some videos, because it's taking that low oxygen water and pulling it out and stirring it up. And so now you're having oxygen more evenly spread out throughout your tank, which I think is a good thing. So to offset the impact of having low intakes and the possibility of taking in sand, I think a sponge over the intake is a good idea. And those sponges, they really help you with helping to spread out the amount of time between having to service the canisters, because they're doing a lot of the heavy work. They're catching food, they're catching large pieces of poop and detritus, and it's sort of dissolving there before it gets sucked in, and so it's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you. All right, so Ben SLT has a question about ammonia. If you want to ask it, Ben, go ahead. The good thing about this group is that if I don't answer the question, somebody in the chat will. So let's see here. John asks about carbon. I usually run carbon for about a month, but the carbon that I'm using, I love the Seachem matrix carbon. I think that carbon is great. The reason I think it's great is I had regular activated charcoal and I had some of the matrix in mesh bags. I was working on a sink and I put them down before I dropped them into a sump. And all the water around the matrix, the Seachem matrix carbon, was gone. The area around it on the sink was dry, and so it had sucked up all the water, whereas the water in the around the commercial activated charcoal, I forget who it was from, was still sitting there in a puddle. So I became a believer in that moment in the matrix charcoal carbon from Seachem. So the way I use it to, after I medicate a tank, to remove residual meds. I'll use it if there's any kind of an odor or any kind of a taint in the water, which I haven't seen in a very, very long time. But that's how I use charcoal, and I only leave it in for a month, and then I throw it out. And I've heard rumors that after it becomes saturated, it can then start to release the toxins that it sucked up. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, does it dissolve and start to then become part of your aquarium again? I don't know. But I don't take the chance. I just go ahead and toss it after about a month. So, which is a little painful because the matrix carbon from Seachem is expensive. Some people just go Mark's Aquatics. Some people just go to the local river. Just pick up rocks, along the river, take them home, give them a scrub down, and toss them in the tank. You can find some beautiful places. Elflower 1 stars. Why Tennessee, Ben? Well, I have a daughter who's a performing artist. You can check her out on Spotify or on Pandora. The name of the group is called Highland Kites, like go fly a kite. Highland Kites. Check them out. Her name is Marissa, and she is relocating from Florida with her husband to Nashville to pursue her dream. And hopefully somewhere in there she's going to have some kids, and we can be the grandparents that help out. So that's the short story. That's the short version. Ricardo, over in the tropics, there's a lot of water movement. I don't think is going to affect your temperature per se. I will say this: the way that you're moving the water, whether you're moving it with canisters or power heads, those are motors, and those motors do produce some heat. I've had I've had canisters be warm to the touch. That's got to be heating the water. And so what is moving the water around is probably more likely to raise the temperature. And also the lights. If you have the lights on for a long time, is your tank near a window where it's getting sunlight? Those are the things I would worry more. And if you're having trouble with the temperature of your tank, I'll show you something if I can pull it out of here without killing myself. This is a unit from you can pick it up at Chewy's, I think. It's from Zoomed, and it's a fan basically, and it can attach. And I just lay it on top of the aquarium and let this blower just blow right over it, and I leave this on at night. And by the morning, I've noticed a nice temperature adjustment into a better range. It's made by Zoomed. It's pretty quiet. I'm not sure if it's plugged in or if I can even show you. Let me see here. So it's running. I don't know, can you hear it? It's running and it's blowing out air. You can see how much air it's blowing. So it runs a cool, just a cool breeze over your tank all night. And you can leave it on during the day as well. And it's definitely a product worth considering if you have a tank that's too hot. Now, I used to keep a tank outside, and in the summer, you know, the temperatures could get up into the hundreds, and so I had to do something different. I had to actually take like a frozen water bottle and float it in the tank, and so I had to get very, very creative. So Zoomed, it's just a cooling unit from Zoomed. I'll put a link under the video and where you can find it. Darren says, Ben, the importance of the fish safety is paramount. So if you have any concerns, best to start fresh. Plus, would be great to follow your progress. Yeah, you know, it would be kind of a fun adventure, you know, like the setting up of the tank, the cycling of the tank, the deciding on what species to keep, the adding of the new fish. There are probably some, maybe there are some aquarium manufacturers or fish providers that would do a collaborative with me because of the size of the channel. Maybe they would work with me on it. If you know somebody, you want to reach out to them and ask them, hey, this guy's moving. Do you want to possibly reach out to him? We can do a collaboration where they could get a plug, you know, throughout the process. I mean, there's things like that I can do. GP has heard about exploding rocks. Thankfully, I've never done this. Yes, thankfully. I'm glad you've never had an exploding rock. And Daniel Barrett, I use Texas Holy Rock, aragonite, and limestone in my 75-gallon. pH, KH, and GH are very stable. Yeah. You know, Holy Rock was really popular a while back. I used to see it everywhere on all the channels. Holy Rock this, Holy Rock that. It's very expensive. Very, very expensive. And I remember, hey, Cooper Cichlids, thank you for coming in. It's very, very expensive. I remember Jay Wilson. Jay Wilson used to have tanks way back when, and he had a giant piece of Holy Rock, and it just kind of blew me away how pretty it was. And he had Mabuna, and the Mabuna were, you know, going in and out of it. I thought that was very, very pretty. And all right, let's see here. Leah Jet, I wanted to breed some small tetras, and I understand you have to drop pH and total dissolved solids to spur spawning. Well, there you go. You know, add, like was discussed in the article, add some wood, right? Do a water change and replace the water with distilled water, and you know, things of that nature will start to drop. Will drop the pH. You know, I do it gradually. Maybe a 15% water change with distilled water, then maybe a 25% water change replaced with distilled, and you'll start to see it drop. Your pH will start to drop, and maybe that will spur them into spawning. So with that being said, let me see if I missed any super chats. If I did, I am sorry. Let me go back here and see if I saw something pop up. But Candy, if there was a super chat, give him a shout out for me because I probably missed it. I've just been so on topic here. But I want to thank all of you for sitting in. And, oh wait, there it is. Hey, Martin. Martin comes through with $9.99. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate that, buddy. Every little bit helps. I'm putting it in the what Matthew has dubbed the moving fund. So it's going into the moving fund. And for those of you who have rented a moving truck or gotten into moving, I think you know how expensive that is. So so that's pretty much it for me. A couple quick final comments here that I want to share with you. And this is, of course, my plug for Cichlids and Coffee, which you already know about. It's like watching a TV program and they do a commercial for the TV program you're watching. Visit my aquarium product recommendations page on Amazon. I'm an Amazon influencer, whatever that means. Visit me on Instagram at ben.o.cichlid for some behind-the-scenes photos and video. Also, be sure to go to Teespring so you can pick up one of these cool mugs. It's the fashion accessory of the season. And definitely, if you're not a member already, visit us on ben.o.cichlid on Facebook. And it's a great group that is troll-free. All right? Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate you sitting in. I know you have a lot to do on the weekends, and you spend an hour with me. I'm very appreciative of it. And thank you so much. Hope to see you next week. Check out tomorrow's video on over versus understocked tanks. Thank you so much. Thank you, moderators. You rock, my friends. Bye-bye.